Madhu and Kito were a young, loving couple living in the lively city of Wari. Their life together was filled with joy, hard work, and a deep connection that kept them strong through every challenge. They had everything they needed: a comfortable home, good jobs, and most importantly, each other. However, there was one thing missing that weighed heavily on their hearts. They had no child. For 5 long years, they prayed earnestly, hoping for a blessing. Every night, Kito would cry out in prayer, asking God to grant them the gift of a child. Madhu, ever the supportive husband, would hold her close and reassure her, whispering, "God's timing is the best. He will bless us when the time is right." Despite their unwavering faith, the waiting was difficult, and every passing year without a child made their longing grow even stronger. One day, their prayers were finally answered. Etta became pregnant. The news spread quickly among their family and friends, bringing excitement and joy to everyone who knew them. Neighbors, relatives, and even co-workers joined in celebrating this long-awaited miracle, but no one was happier than Kito and Madhu. They spent the next 9 months preparing for their baby, making sure everything was perfect. They decorated the nursery, bought baby clothes, and dreamed about the day they would finally hold their child in their arms. When the moment arrived, and Kito gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Madhu was overwhelmed with emotion. Tears filled his eyes as he gently held their newborn daughter for the first time. "She's perfect," he whispered, completely in awe. They named her Koi, a name that reflected their gratitude to God for finally blessing them with the child they had longed for. Bringing Koi home was an unforgettable experience. Their house was constantly filled with visitors, all eager to see the baby. Family, friends, and neighbors came with gifts, baby clothes, toys, and even money, which they lovingly placed in Koi's tiny hands as a sign of blessing. Some people held her, rocking her gently, while others kissed her chubby cheeks or pressed small naira notes into her hands. One woman, their neighbor Mrs. Ataku, reached out excitedly and said, "Let me carry her." Such a precious little one. Madhu and Kito, overjoyed by the love and attention, welcomed everyone with open arms. They were deeply touched by the kindness of those around them and felt reassured knowing that so many people cared for their daughter. To them, this was a beautiful moment of shared happiness, a celebration of Koi's arrival into the world. Little did they know their openness and trust in everyone around them would soon lead to unforeseen consequences that would change their lives forever. One evening, as the stream of visitors continued, Kito's colleague from work, Amanda, stopped by to congratulate the new parents. Unlike the others, Amanda was a practical and cautious woman. She admired little Koi from a distance, smiling warmly as she watched Madhu and Itu bask in their happiness. However, as she sat quietly in the corner, she couldn't help but notice how frequently people were picking up the baby. Some held her for extended periods, others kissed her cheeks, and many pressed money into her tiny hands. Ananda's eyes darkened with concern. After the last guest left, she gently pulled Shu to a side and said, "I need to talk to you." Tu, still in high spirits from the evening celebrations, looked at Amanda curiously. "What is it?" she asked. Amanda hesitated before speaking. "I don't mean to intrude, but I think you should be more careful about who carries Koi." Akta laughed lightly, dismissing the concern. "Amanda, these are our friends and family. They're just here to celebrate with us." But Amanda shook her head. "Not everyone who smiles at you is truly happy for you," she said softly. "You don't know what's in people's heart." Ia waved her hand dismissively, unwilling to entertain such an idea. "You're overthinking. Who could possibly harm a little child?" Amanda sighed and chose her words carefully. "Sometimes it's not even about people wanting to harm her intentionally. Babies are fragile. Germs are everywhere. And there are other things you may not be able to see that could affect her. My advice is simple: don't let everyone carry her. You can still show her to people, but maybe just tell them she's sleeping if they ask to hold her. Onyx frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the suggestion. That would seem rude, she protested. They would think I'm being ungrateful. Amanda's expression remained firm. Your baby's safety is more important than what people think. It's better to be cautious now than to regret it later. That night, as Ekto lay in bed next to Madhu, she found herself replaying Amanda's words in her head. Turning to her husband, she brought up the conversation. Amanda thinks we should stop letting so many people hold Koi, she said hesitantly. Madhu frowned. Why? What's wrong with people carrying her? They're just showing love. Kal let out a relieved sigh, happy that Madhu felt the same way she did. That's exactly what I told her, she said. She just worries too much. And so life went on as usual. Every day, people continued to visit, bringing gifts and holding Koi in their arms. Madhu and Ito basked in the love and attention their daughter was receiving, never once thinking that Amanda's warning might have had some truth to it. To them, it was a joyous time, and they didn't want to dampen the excitement by being overly cautious. Koi was surrounded by warmth and affection, and her parents believed that was all that mattered. But as time passed, they would soon learn that not all love is genuine and not every smiling face carries good intentions. 3 months after Koi's birth, life seemed to be settling into a comfortable rhythm. The excitement of having a newborn had gradually calmed, and Kyo was preparing to return to work. She had found a daycare close to her office and felt reassured knowing she could check on Koi whenever necessary. The night before her first day back, she told Madhu about her plans while folding tiny baby clothes. I like how close the daycare is, she said with a smile. I can see her during my lunch break if I need to. Madhu nodded in agreement as he held Koi in his arms. That's a good idea, he said, but don't stress too much. You're already a great mom. Koi will be fine. That reassurance was all Ita needed to hear. The next morning, she woke up early, packed Koi's baby bag, and prepared for the day ahead. But just as she reached into the crib to pick up her daughter, her heart stopped. Koi's tiny body was burning with fever, and her eyes had rolled back, leaving only the whites visible. A wave of panic crashed over Iktu as she whispered her daughter's name. Koi? Her voice trembled. She frantically shook her baby, but Koi was unresponsive. Madhu, she screamed, come quickly. Madhu rushed in, his hair still dripping from his morning shower. What is it? He asked in alarm. But the moment he saw Koi's lifeless body and felt the heat radiating from her, his face drained of color. She was fine last night, he murmured in disbelief. What happened? Without wasting another second, they wrapped Koi in a blanket and rushed to the hospital. The drive felt endless. Kiitu clutched her baby to her chest, whispering desperate prayers between sobs. God, please save my baby. Please don't let anything happen to her. The moment they arrived, doctors and nurses sprang into action. Her temperature is dangerously high, one nurse said while placing a cold towel on Koi's forehead. We need to run tests immediately. Hours later, the doctor returned with grim news. Your baby's blood levels are critically low, he said, his face heavy with concern. We need to do a blood transfusion immediately. Madhu felt his knees weaken. Blood loss? He asked, bewildered. How is that possible? She's just a baby. The doctor sighed. It could be an infection or something else. We need to investigate further. But right now, we have to act fast. Without hesitation, Madhu stepped forward. Take my blood, he said. Do whatever you need to do to save my daughter. After the transfusion, Koi's condition seemed to stabilize. Her fever dropped, and her tiny body, once burning hot, started to cool. Tuta held her daughter close, relief washing over her. "I thought I was going to lose you," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. 3 days later, they were discharged from the hospital, and for a brief moment, life felt normal again. But the relief was short-lived. The very next morning, Koi's fever returned, worse than before. Her skin had turned pale, and her weak cries sent shivers down Kito's spine. "No, no, no," she sobbed. "This can't be happening again." They rushed back to the hospital where doctors ran more tests. Again, Koi's blood levels had dropped to a dangerously low level. Another transfusion was done, and she improved only for the same thing to happen again days later. "This doesn't make sense," one doctor admitted, rubbing his temples. "How can a baby lose so much blood in such a short time?" Akto and Madhu were drowning in fear and confusion. It was as if something unseen was draining the life out of their child, and no one had any answers. As the days passed, Koi's condition continued to deteriorate, and the doctors seemed unable to find a medical explanation. Every test came back inconclusive, and despite multiple blood transfusions, her levels kept dropping. Akto and Madhu were exhausted physically, emotionally, and financially. The hospital bills were piling up, forcing Madhu to take loans and borrow money from friends just to keep their daughter alive. Ko, once full of life and energy, now looked like a shadow of herself. She had lost weight, dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights, and her once bright face was now etched with worry. One night, while watching over Koi in the hospital, she met an older nurse named Mrs. Ojugo, who had been following their case. The woman had heard about their struggles, and seeing the pain in Sichio's eyes, felt compelled to reach out. She approached Tito gently and asked, "My dear, may I sit with you for a moment?" Ko, too tired to speak, simply nodded. Mrs. Ojugo sat down beside her, looking at Koi with sympathy. "She's such a beautiful child," she said softly. "I'm so sorry for what you're going through." Tito sighed deeply and rubbed her tired eyes. "I don't know what to do anymore," she admitted. "I waited 5 years for this child. I thought all my suffering was over when she was born, but it feels like it's only just begun." Tears welled up in her eyes as she continued. "Since she was 3 months old, she's been falling sick. She's been falling sick. Her blood keeps disappearing, and the doctors don't even know why. We've tried everything, hospitals, medicines, prayers, but nothing is working. My husband has spent all his money. We don't have anything left." Mrs. Ojugo listened patiently, then gently took Sito's hand in hers. "Have you considered that this may not be a medical issue?" she asked. Kito looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked hesitantly. "Sometimes when things don't make sense medically, it means there may be something spiritual going on," Mrs. Ojugo explained. "I don't say this to scare you, but sometimes people use evil means to harm others, especially little children. Their innocence makes them vulnerable." Ekto's heart pounded. She had never thought about that possibility, but "I've been praying," she whispered. "I don't know what else to do." Mrs. Ojugo leaned in closer. "My church is holding a prayer vigil tomorrow night," she said. "We will be praying for different cases, and I want to bring Koi's situation before God. I believe he will intervene." Tears streamed down Sito's face. "You would do that for us?" she asked, her voice breaking. Mrs. Ojugo nodded. "Of course," she said, "but I must do this privately. It is against hospital policy to discuss these things." Tichu grabbed her hands and held them tightly. "Thank you, Ma," she said, a flicker of hope returning to her tired eyes. That night, as Mrs. Ojugo attended the prayer meeting, she spoke about Koi's case. The entire congregation joined in prayer, asking God to reveal the cause of the child's suffering. The pastor prayed specifically for the family's protection, sensing that something unseen was at work. 2 days later, Koi's condition worsened again, and the hospital suggested transferring her to another facility. But with no money left, Madhu made a heartbreaking decision. "Let's just take her home," he said. "I can't keep borrowing when I haven't even paid back what I owe." With heavy hearts, they left the hospital, not knowing what lay ahead. That evening, Mrs. Ojugo, deeply worried about them, called Ekdo. "I have been thinking about your baby," she said. "Can I visit you?" Within an hour, she arrived at their small apartment, and when she saw Koi lying weakly on the bed, barely clinging to life, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh my God," she whispered, "this child needs serious prayer." That evening, as Mrs. Ojugo sat with Sichio and Madhu in their small, dimly lit apartment, she could feel the weight of their despair. Koi lay weakly on the bed, her tiny body barely moving, her breathing shallow. It was heartbreaking to see a child who should have been full of life so frail and unresponsive. "We have tried everything," Situ murmured, stroking her daughter's hand with trembling fingers. "Hospitals, treatments, prayers, but nothing is working." Madhu sat silently beside her, his face etched with exhaustion and frustration. He had always been a man of strength, but this battle was breaking him. "We don't know what else to do," he admitted. Mrs. Ojugo took a deep breath. "I told you I took this case to my church," she said gently. "My pastor and the prayer warriors have been interceding for your child. They want you to bring Koi to a special prayer meeting." Tu immediately sat up. "I'm ready to go now," she said, desperation lacing her voice. But Mrs. Ojugo shook her head. "Not tonight, my dear. The meeting is on Wednesday night. That's just 2 days away." Aktu sighed in disappointment but nodded. "All right, Mad, we will wait." When Madhu returned home that evening, Stito told him about the invitation. "Do you think this will work?" he asked, skepticism clear in his tone. Tu looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and hope. "What else can we do, Madhu?" she asked softly. "We've tried everything. Let's just trust God." Madhu sighed and ran a hand over his face. He was tired of hoping, tired of disappointment, but deep down, he knew they had no other option. "All right," he said, "we'll go." When weed night finally arrived, Madhu carried Koi in his arms while Sacha held a small bag with diapers and a bottle of water. The church was already filled with people deep in worship, their voices rising in powerful prayer. The pastor and prayer warriors welcomed them warmly before beginning the intercession for Koi. As the prayers intensified, Koi suddenly began coughing violently. Her tiny body went ice cold, then burning hot within seconds. Then, without warning, she began convulsing. Panic spread through the room, but the pastor's voice rang out above it all. "Pray harder," he commanded. Something is happening in the spirit. The prayers grew louder, more fervent. The air felt charged, heavy with unseen power. Then, suddenly, one of the prayer warriors raised his hands, signaling for silence. The room fell still. With his eyes shut tightly, he spoke. "I see someone," he murmured. "A man. He came with a cash gift and carried this child when she was a newborn." He touched her forehead, her hands, and then he looked into her eyes. He left something on her. A collective gasp filled the church. The pastor turned to Madhu and Kitu. "Did you allow many people to carry your baby?" he asked. Madhu and Kitu exchanged a shocked glance. "We only allowed friends, neighbors, and family," Madhu stammered. "Everyone was happy for us," the pastor shook his head solemnly. "Not everyone who smiles at you is truly happy for you," he said. "Little babies have fragile spirits, and evil people often target them. Their innocent blood is powerful for wicked rituals. But tonight, by the power of God, we break this curse." The prayers resumed, more intense than before. And then, out of nowhere, Koi let out a loud, piercing cry, a cry so strong it startled everyone in the room. It was the first time in months that she had shown such strength. "Praise God!" the pastor shouted. The chains have been broken. The room erupted in shouts of joy and thanksgiving. Madhu and Ki too fell to their knees, weeping and thanking God. That night, they returned home with a peaceful baby for the first time in nearly a year. As Madhu and Fido walked into their home that night carrying a peacefully sleeping koi, it felt surreal. For months, they had lived in constant fear, watching their daughter slip away with no explanation. But tonight, for the first time in almost a year, she looked at ease. Chio carefully laid her down in her crib, brushing a hand over her tiny forehead, half expecting to feel the burning heat that had tormented her for so long. But her skin was cool, her breathing was steady. Tears welled up in Kitio's eyes as she turned to Madhu. "She's really healed," she whispered, afraid to speak too loudly, as if the moment might disappear. Madhu wrapped his arms around her, his own voice shaking with emotion. "We could have lost her," he admitted. "After everything we went through, if God hadn't stepped in, I don't even want to think about what could have happened." They sat together in silence for a long time, watching their baby girl sleep. And as the days passed, it became clear Koi was getting stronger. She started sitting up, then crawling, and before they knew it, she was standing, smiling, and playing like any other healthy child. It was as if she had been given a second chance at life, determined never to take that for granted. Madhu and Ektu made a decision they would leave. Too many people in their old neighborhood had access to their lives. They had been too open, too trusting, and it had almost cost them their daughter. But now they had learned their lesson. Quietly, without telling anyone, they found a new apartment in a faraway neighborhood. They packed up their belongings and left in the middle of the night, slipping away without a word. In their new home, they lived differently. They kept their circle small, avoided unnecessary conversations, and made sure to keep their family life private. "We must be very careful this time," Madhu would remind Stichu. "Not everyone who smiles at you is happy for you." And Kichu agreed. She had learned firsthand how dangerous blind trust could be. When their second child, a baby boy named Shigo, was born, they handled everything differently. They did not announce the pregnancy to everyone. They did not let visitors carry or touch him. If anyone asked to see the baby, Akhtar would politely smile and say, "He's sleeping, but thank you for coming." Every gift, every piece of money given was placed on the family's Bible and prayed over before being used. Caution was no longer seen as fear, it was wisdom. This story carries a powerful lesson that many can relate to, especially in cultures where community and shared joy are deeply ingrained. It is natural to want to celebrate blessings, to share happiness with those around us. But not everyone who claps for you is truly happy for you. Some carry hidden envy, ill intentions, or simply do not understand the consequences of their actions. As Proverbs 22:3 says, "A prudent person foresees the evil and hides himself, but the simple keeps going and pays the penalty." In life, wisdom is knowing when to draw boundaries, when to protect what is most precious, and when to recognize that not every smiling face has good intentions. Madhu and Sito learned this the hard way, but they emerged stronger, wiser, and more protective of their family. Their story is a reminder to us all some things are too valuable to be shared carelessly. It is always better to be safe than sorry.